Hello, it's Janet Greenwood from TT Environmental here, and I'm going to go through and give you a presentation that I gave at ChemUK 2024 called Regulatory Affairs is a Team Sport. So grab a beverage of your choice. This isn't going to take too long, but it's worthwhile having a bit of coffee while we do it, because this report is a Chemicals Coffee Time report from our weekly email newsletter. Right, so what happened to regulatory affairs? Well, when I first joined the chemical industry in the mid-1990s, regulatory affairs was a tiny part of someone's technical role that happened at the end of the product development process. For example, as a technical service chemist, we used to be told, get the SDS done just before something went out of the door. And now regulatory affairs is a whole job of itself for an entire department. Now, I don't want to say that it was like that for things like pesticides or biocides or the really high hazard stuff, but for a lot of products, that's exactly what happened. And yes, I do indeed sound like a dinosaur. I mean, frankly, it's a tidal wave of chemical regulations we're dealing with these days. We've got product safety, so the EU and UK or GB variants, REACH, CLP, plant protection products, biocides, detergents, and so on. We have the big international treaties, prior informed consent, chemical weapons, greenhouse gases, etc. And then we have customs and chemicals, for example, REACH at EU customs, the Y code for tariff documents, or CBAM, the new carbon border adjustment mechanism. Whew, easy for me to say. But don't forget those unexpected consequences. We've got difficulties keeping track of regulations and their updates and new designations, for example, restrictions, SVHC, workplace exposure limits. We've got extra test dating coming in, which is then changing classifications. We have regulations and overlaps with unforeseen interactions. REACH and CLP are a classic example of that. And individual regulations are just far too big for any one mind to understand. Now at Chemicals Coffee Time, we rely on our lovely readers to flag things up. And I've got a Chemicals Coffee Time top tip for you coming up. If anyone says they understand all of REACH or all of CLP, keep smiling and back out of the room. Never turn your back on a crazy person. Now, we've heard a lot about individual regulations at ChemUK this year, but we haven't heard so much about how regulations as a whole impact on an individual business and how we can prepare our businesses to deal with that tidal wave. Because as far as I can see, the rate of regulatory change and new information on chemicals seems to be speeding up. And things can so easily go wrong with regulations. You know, R&D spends 6 months developing a product using a raw material which is legal in the lab, but banned for either production or commercial purposes. Purchasing find a new supplier for a raw material which is cheaper, but it contains an SVHC impurity when the customer won't accept any SVHCs at notifiable concentrations. Or the sales team suddenly find out that their whiz-bang fancy product can't be used for a particular use, or it can't be sold to consumers. That one is particularly close to my heart because the sales guys promised the customer a product that broke at least 2 of the laws of thermodynamics, and they were very upset when I told them it couldn't physically be made. And guess who's to blame in all of this these days? Yes, it's our regulatory affairs person. So why does that happen? Well, one of the reasons is people only see their part of the picture. You know, it feels, particularly to people like production or sales, it feels like regulatory affairs are trying to stop them doing their jobs. And their jobs are to get the product invented, made, sold and delivered. And they're only human, you know, my bit is the most important and everything else is there to support me. It's a common attitude, you know, and I think we all suffer from it from time to time. So how does regulatory affairs fit into a modern chemical business? But before we do that, who is important in a business? Well, this is the upside down model, which is John Timpson. So John Timpson of Timpson Shoe Shops fame has written a book on this. It's the upside down model. And if you've got an org chart that doesn't include customers, you're doing it wrong, frankly, because the most important people in a business are your paying customers. And below that layer, we have the people directly serving customers, so sales, production, logistics. Underneath that, we have people supporting the customer servers, so marketing, accounts, regulatory affairs, health and safety, product developers, and so on. Then we have management, and right at the bottom, it's the MD. Okay, so let's go back to having a look at regulatory affairs within a chemical business. Thinking about the manufacturing cycle, and this snail model just seemed to fit very nicely as a visual aid. We've got pre-production, which is where we identify the market and the product quite often at the same time, and then we develop the product and process. And then we have production itself, where we market the product, take sales order, plan production, order raw materials, produce the product, store, pack and deliver, and then invoice and get paid. And of course, this cycle, once you've got your products, can continue indefinitely. You'll notice as well that this is written for a business with pull through. So we're relying on the orders being taken before we actually buy the raw materials. And if you can organize your business in that way, it will make life a lot easier for you generally. And finally, right at post-production, we have dealing with wastes, because there are always wastes. It's just part of being in chemicals. So looking at the regulatory affairs impacts in the pre-production phase, you'll see I've highlighted marketing, sales, and the chemists who are actually identifying the market and the product in the first place. Now, people who are developing a product think, what customer needs does it fulfill? Will the customer accept certain symbols on the label or not? Is it going to work? Can we make it economically and safely? Can we sell the dratted thing? And as regulatory affairs people, they're thinking, can the product be made legally and sold into the markets for that use? You know, is there an existing REACH registration of the substances and uses, or how much is it going to cost to get? Are there any bans or restrictions on the product and or its raw materials? Are R&D using legal raw materials even? What will the hazard classification be? Do we have enough information to be able to classify, label and produce the safety data sheet yet? And of course, health and safety have their own separate concerns even at this early stage. Now, I think one of the key things is that assessing product viability has changed. In the olden days, it used to be marketing. Is there a market for this? Chemistry or physics, can we actually make it? And then, is the cost-profit balance right? Is it worth doing? But these days, it's more like a square, because we have to add regulations. Is it legal to make, sell and use the product into our product viability thinking? And interestingly, you'll notice that these functions are not directly customer serving functions, but together they set out the scope of products that your business can make. So let's have a look at the regulatory affairs impacts on production itself. And you'll see I've highlighted marketing again, procurement or purchasing, and logistics. Now, the people making the product think, can we get enough raw materials on time? And that is particularly key at the moment because, as I'm sure you'll be aware, since lockdown and the Ever-Given crisis and the Texas cold spell, we have been in a perma-crisis for chemical supply. The supply chain crisis is just going on in the background, and a lot of people don't realise that. But I know for people in procurement and purchasing, this is a real headache. And then the second thing is, assuming we can get enough raw materials, can we make the product to fulfill the orders? Now, regulatory affairs are thinking a lot more than that. They're thinking, well, are the raw materials, intermediates, finished products and their uses registered for REACH? Are the raw materials free from undesirable substances or restrictions, prior informed consent, authorizations, SVHCs, especially if you have changed supplier, which is happening an awful lot at the moment? Has the product been classified correctly for GHS CLP, for transport, for hazardous waste? Are the CLP GHS labels and safety data sheets correct? Are we making illegal claims in our marketing? If we're selling this online, are we giving people the correct information prior to purchase like we're supposed to? And I think it's also important to recognise that these days regulations can also change existing products. and going back to my traditional business model, you've got like a traffic light system. Is there a market? Can we make it? Is it profitable? And when we used to think about profitability for ongoing, for the viability rather of an ongoing product, profitability was like the numero uno. That was the main thing we were bothered about. But these days we've got, is there a market? Can we make it? And then we have, what about all the regulations? And I've put that in as a red light because it can mean a red light for stop or an amber light for things need to change. And then finally we have, is the profitability correct? And of course, regulations can also affect profitability when we're talking about things like REACH regulation. So both regulations and costs profit balance will affect existing products these days. Now, regulations, unfortunately, can have far more adverse impact than the cost profit balance. And they can appear from multiple sources almost out of the blue. And that adds massive uncertainty to the business model for chemical companies. So I think you can begin to see why I say regulatory affairs should be a team sport, because it impacts on so many parts of the manufacturing and business processes, and because it can stop products being sold or even made in the first place. So the question is, how do we turn regulatory affairs from villain to hero? Well, my top tip on this is change how regulatory affairs is perceived. Regulatory affairs isn't about business prevention, it's business enablement. Value your role if you're in regulatory affairs. If you don't, why should anyone else? And mind your own thoughts and language. See your stories as heroic. Now, you might think that's silly, but there is a ripple out effect from that, and we've seen it with health and safety. Health and safety is now ingrained into nearly every single chemical business in the UK and beyond. And if something is not safe to make, it will not be made. And then the other important thing is to get senior management buy-out. Make sure they understand, value, and support your role too. And the next step is to raise awareness across the whole of your business. Everyone should have a basic awareness of how the main chemical product regulations affect your business as a whole and their part in it. They need to know how regulatory affairs need to be aware of what's going on as soon as possible, and also how regulatory affairs can help everyone do their jobs effectively. Our next thing is to build your regulatory affairs team and systems. Now, a lot of people think that it's just regulatory affairs like this. You're doing regulatory research at ECHA at the HSE, and from that you can magically produce new safety data sheets or labels. But let me tell you something, it's a lot easier if you also receive information from other parts of your business. So from pre-production, from marketing, sales, and from people developing new products, and from production, marketing, sales, purchasing, procurement, and logistics again. If you can encourage everybody to pass new data on the chemical product through to you, that will then help you produce new information, for example, safety data sheets, labels, or say, whoa, we need to reformulate this product, or we need to find a different raw material. And then the product can be either recognized as being legally compliant, or it can be altered, or it can be removed. The key thing is to engineer regulatory compliance as early as possible. So some starting questions, and again, a top tip for you. Map the regulatory information flows in your business to see where the gaps might be, a bit like a block diagram or a simplified process flow diagram. So how do you make sure new products abide by existing regulations? How can you make sure all the existing products you make are legal? Who receives new safety data sheets when they come in, and how are they checked? For example, in a lot of businesses, the safety data sheets go to the health and safety manager, which is then fed into the COSH system. But if regulatory affairs need to see that information as well, why aren't they copied in on that? Because then they can deal with changes in classification, for example, straight away. And also, what happens if a raw material changes classification or designation, like restriction, authorization, or SVHC? Do you have a process for updating the information on that product and potentially changing it. And Ali wanted me to add some information in that she's found recently from talking to our clients, which is the trickier and expensive areas that people can miss, because the previous slide was about the obvious stuff in a way. So the registration of REACH uses, which will impact procurement and purchasing. Can we buy something in the first place? Is it sensible to buy it if we can't actually use it? So remember, uses are registered for REACH, not just chemicals themselves. Include your own uses in the list of uses, not just your customers. And people sometimes forget, oh, well, yeah, I'm selling it to somebody who's using it as a fragrance, but I'm formulating with it. Make sure your uses are in as well. Another thing to watch out for is different suppliers may register a different sort of selection of uses. Are your uses and your customers' uses covered? You need to check that for each and every individual supplier. And of course, if a use isn't registered, then some expensive options do exist. Second thing is REACH tonnage band limitations, and that impacts on sales and also on your customers. If you get to the point of being, just tipping over from 9.99 tons per year to 1.001 tons per year, in REACH terms, it can get mega expensive. This can restrict sales. Again, expensive options exist. For example, going up a tonnage band in your registration. But are there other ways around it? Can you buy in a product from overseas or import it from your sister company somewhere else? So there are, having said that, that would also bring in REACH tonnage band things. But if somebody can do that for you and then sell it on to you, so you've got a nice invoice and sales trail, something to think about. And another thing is there's a new country for sale, and this can matter even within the EU member states. And again, obviously it's going to impact on your sales team and your customers, but there can be new notifications or registrations required, and some of those notifications can be EU member state specific. France, I am looking at you in particular. Places like Denmark can also have extra notifications over and above REACH. So that can delay bringing a product to market in the first place massively. We're talking 6 months or more. So you can see that these are some of the things that you need to be aware of, not just the bog standard regulatory affairs things. Involve regulatory affairs early in the process. It's never a bad idea. So TLDR, or as we dinosaurs say, conclusions. Regulatory and data changes are going to continue, and they're going to affect your current products and where they can be used and sold. And regulatory affairs, I believe, really has become a team sport as more aspects of the business are involved or affected by it. Your systems and your people need to be able to cope to make sure you're not disappointing customers, producing unsaleable goods, which then need to be disposed of, and let's not go into the cost of disposing of hazardous waste, or simply wasting valuable staff time that ought to be working on more viable products. Building in communication and decision paths at the right point in the business cycle is critical to get regulatory affairs working effectively in protecting and enabling your product range. So, some support for regulatory affairs staff. We have Chemicals Coffee Time, our newsletter, weekly by email, which helps keep you up to date with regulatory changes, and we get a lot of support from our lovely readers because, as I may have mentioned earlier, all of this is more than any one brain can cope with. We also have the Chemical Regulation Self-Help Group, which can help with peer discussion and support, and again, thanks to our lovely members. And some things to think about. You're not alone. We all feel, if we are the only person dealing with regulatory affairs in a business, we all feel, I'm the only person dealing with this. No, you're not. And we all struggle with interpretation and compliance. Asking for help is a sign of strength. And we also have support for chemical businesses. We've got regulatory affairs online training in our course CLP Mastery. And we have expert regulatory affairs support from our specialist consultants, by which I mean Alison. Really, I can help with certain things, but Ali is our regulatory affairs lady. So we have regulatory and systems consultancy, and we have on-site staff, training and awareness. And you can email either of us on these emails below. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them on email, janet@ttenvironmental.co.uk. And thank you very much for watching. Bye.